All right, hi everyone. We are looking at our next section today, which is over midpoint and segment bisectors. So let's jump right into what the midpoint is. So specifically the midpoint is the point halfway between the endpoints of a segment. So we're going to look at a couple of ways that we can find the midpoint, depending on how your segment is shown to you. So to find the midpoint of a segment on a number line, we're going to find the mean, which is also known as the average. So we're going to find the mean or the average of the segment's endpoints. Okay, and we're going to use the coordinates to find that midpoint. So if segment AB has endpoints at, x1 and x2 on a number line, then the midpoint, we're just going to call that point M of that same segment, has coordinates at, let's find that formula. So our midpoint is going to be located at the average of the two ends. So x1 plus x2, there's two of them there, and we'll divide that by 2. So let's see where we have our segments and where our information is going to be found. All right, so again, the average of your two ends. So the first point we come to, we'll let that be x1. The second end point, the other end over to the far side, we'll let that be x2. And when we find the midpoint, that's the point again in the absolute middle. So this is the location where we'll find x1 plus x2, and then we'll divide that number by 2, and we'll figure out where the middle is located. So we're going to try an example that uses exactly that formula. All right, so we have a number line here, and we're going to find the midpoint of each of these different segments. So the first one we're going to do is segment AD. So we're going all the way from A all the way out to D. So I need those two numbers, the location of those ends. All right, so my x1, -12, my x2, and 18. The rule says add them up and divide by 2 to figure out where the middle is. So if I have -12 plus 18, that gives me a 6. And then I need to divide that by 2, which leaves me at the location of 3. So when I go up to my number line at the 3, that is the midpoint of that whole segment. So now let's repeat this for another segment. All right, so now we're looking at A to C. So we started A, and I'm going to C. So again, my x1 is the same -12 as before. My x2 is a 6. So again, the rule says to add those up, so -12 plus 6, and divide by 2. So this time I have -6 in the top, 2 on the bottom. So this time at -3 is where my midpoint is located. So let's keep going. Not always are the midpoints that we're dealing with going to be on just a plain number line. Sometimes our midpoints come on a graph, just like we saw with segment distance. So this time, let's see what kind of formula we have. So this time we have 2 points. Both of them now are an x and a y. So if we have the points x1, y1, and the point x2, y2 on a graph, we can find our midpoint by doing the same kind of idea. But add up your x's. Oops, sorry, that's a little big. So x1 plus x2, still dividing by 2, but because now we have the y coordinates, we do the same thing to them. y1 plus y2, and then divide by 2. So let's see where all this ends up when we put it on our graphs. So let's get a graph up here. Sorry, that's way too big. All right, so our first point up at the top, x1 and y1. our other point down towards the bottom, the second point, our x2, y2, and the location in the middle, your midpoint, is our x1 plus x2, divide by 2, and do the same thing again to the y's, y1 plus y2, divide by 2, and so there is our midpoint. Oops, sorry, that's again a little too big. And so those are the formulas for either a number line or on a graph. So let's see what happens when we use our graph. All right, so find the coordinates of the midpoint with the segment with the given ends. All right, so like we did with the distance formula, we're going to label these x1 and y1, x2 and y2. So for our midpoint, add up those x's. So 7 plus 4, again, adding up these x's. We'll divide that by 2 in just a second, and I have to go do the same thing to the y's. A 1 and a 1. So 1 plus 1 divided by 2. So let's see what our final result is going to look like. All right, 7 plus 4 gives us an 11. We'll divide that by 2. 1 plus 1 is a 2, and then we'll divide that by 2. All right, so 11 over 2 is not going to simplify down any farther, so we can leave it. But 2 over 2 will simplify down to a positive 1. Now, the other option you could have done, you can change 11 over 2 to 5.5. Either way, it's the same number. But if we get long repeating decimals or extremely long decimals in general, we want to just leave it as the fraction. But if we get a nice single digits here, you can leave the decimal. All right, let's try the next one. x1 and y1, x2 and y2. So same as before, add up those x's. So we're looking at the 5 and the 3. And then we'll divide that by 2. And then we'll do your y's, a -3 and a -8. And then we'll divide that by 2. So let's see what we get. So now we have 5 plus 3 is an 8. Divide by 2. -3 plus -8, -11, still over 2. All right, let's keep going, see if we can simplify this any farther. So 8 divided by 2 gives me a 4. -11 over 2 is not going to simplify down any farther, so we can just leave it. And again, like before, if you were to give me -5.5 with a decimal, that's perfectly fine as well. Okay, so let's see now if we can work backwards. This time, find the coordinates of G if F is at 1 and 3.5. That is the midpoint already. So guys, this time they're giving you a midpoint. So they tell us the midpoint is 1 and 3.5. They also tell us that J has the coordinates at 6, 2. So they've given you an end and they've given you the middle. We need to find the other endpoint. So they told us one endpoint was 6, -2. The other endpoint is what I have to solve for. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Where's the other end? So let's solve this up. We're going to write 2 equations. One that'll help us find the x, one that'll help us find the y. All right, so let's start with finding our x. All right, so our formula says take our x1. So we're going to let that be our x, plus your x2. We'll let that be the 6. And then we'll divide that by 2, and we're supposed to get a 1. So let's solve this out. All right, now when we're dealing with solving fractions, since that entire numerator of x plus 6 is being divided, I'm going to have to undo that division first. And the only way I can undo a division is to multiply. So I'm going to have to first multiply by 2 to get rid of that divide by 2. And now I have x plus 6 is equal to 1 times 2, which is a 2. Now I can keep going. Minus the 6, and my missing x coordinate, a -4. So now I know where my first part of the end is. Let's do the same thing to the y's. So y plus our -2 divided by 2 is supposed to give us the 3.5. Okay, like before, undo the divide by 2 first. So multiply both pieces by 2. So a times 2 and a divide 2 will cancel out. Now, anytime we have plus a negative, remember that's the same as a minus. So I'm going to go ahead and write -2 here. And 3.5 times 2 gives me a 7. Now we can add that 2 back. And my missing y coordinate is a 9. Now I know where my other endpoint is going to be at, which is -4, 9. And there's my final endpoint. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about your 2 different midpoint formulas, and also how you can use those formulas to count, to figure out and work backwards to get your other end. So guys, please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. Bye, guys, and have a great rest of your day.